All right, we're going to continue with our coverage of our top story that police have made several arrests in the killing of Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a killing that led to a major diplomatic rift between Canada and India.
Announcements are not a complete account of the investigative work currently underway. There are separate and distinct investigations ongoing into these matters, certainly not limited to the involvement of the people arrested today, and these efforts include investigating connections to the government of India.
At this point, 3 men have been charged with carrying out the shooting of Hardeep Singh Nijjar outside a Sikh temple in Surrey, British Columbia last June. Raids took place in Edmonton this morning. CBC News has learned the men arrested are Indian nationals, and this was confirmed by police who entered Canada after 2021, and at least some of them on international student visas. Sources close to the investigation say police are also investigating possible links to 3 other killings on Canadian soil. Here with me to talk about this and the foreign interference report are 2 former CSIS directors, Ward Elcock and Richard Fadden. Gentlemen, we had you booked to come in to talk about Justice Ogg, and it's a lucky coincidence you're here to speak with this. I want to start with this, and Richard Fadden, just what is your reaction to the fact that I think the last time we talked about the killing of Mr. Nijjar, we believed nobody would be arrested because you assumed they would have fled the country, potentially. 3
That's
people
right.
today.
Well, I start by saying I was wrong. I was absolutely convinced, taking what the Prime Minister said at face value, that there was a Government of India sponsor, that they would have utilized somebody with close ties to India, and that 20 minutes after the deed, they would have left the country. This was not a particularly sophisticated way of doing this. They used some local yokels, for lack of a better way. They didn't leave the area. And I, like everybody else, am pleased that the police were able to conclude an investigation. Still doesn't help confirm in any material way the link between the government of India and what happened.
Mm-hmm. But, you know, Ward Elcock, here we are. There's the arrest. The police have said out loud that they are investigating a link with the government of India. And also there's a reporting by Evan that they're looking at other potential murders. What do you make of what we learned today?
None of it surprises me, although I am surprised as with Dick, that they haven't managed to arrest anybody. I thought these individuals would have been long gone, and it does say a lot about the professionalism or lack of professionalism of the Indian intelligence service, RAW. I mean, clearly doing it this way is unprofessional, to say the least. But none of this is surprising. I have wondered for some time whether some of the killings in the Sikh community were also similar kinds of projects. It'll be interesting to see if they can find information that will allow them to tie these individuals or others to those killings. Whether they will ever be able to prove that the Indian government was part of this or not, I think really comes down to, were they so unprofessional that they had no cutouts? If they were doing it at least half professionally, they probably would have had a cutout so that no Indian official would ever have dealt with these individuals.
A cutout, you mean like a middleman, essentially, like somebody, a broker, you know?
Yeah, a broker who essentially could create a gulf between the government of India and these individuals who probably never knew who the ultimate sponsor was. I mean,
right.
These appear to be gang members who are abiding by the instructions of their gang rather than abiding by the government necessarily, the instructions of the government of India.
So Richard Fadden, obviously they're investigating the Indian connection, and they've been dealing with the Indian government and dealing with Indian police, and we heard from the investigators in Surrey today that they're not getting a lot of cooperation. What does that tell us? Is that just the way the Indian police deals with the Canadian police, or does that fuel suspicion?
Well, no, I think it tells us more than that. I say no sane country would ever admit that it has consciously sought the execution of third-party nationals on their home ground. There is no way that a country is going to admit to a policeman or anybody else, yes, I instructed my agent to kill a Canadian. So I don't think it proves more than that the government has not cooperated. It is not cooperating, and I don't think it will cooperate. And if we were dealing with country X, it would be exactly the same thing. I think if anything comes out of this, is probably both because of what's happened here and what has happened in the United States. I think India is going to be a little more careful about how they do these things in the future, at least one hopes so. But Indian police and Indian intelligence, broadly speaking, hard to cooperate with. You know, they're very, very dedicated to their own interests, to the exclusion of cooperating. This is just another small example of that.
But you mentioned what we saw in the United States. I've kept this indictment that was unsealed last year about the murder plot, the alleged murder plot there. And it is the allegations of an Indian government official trying to use an intermediary to hire someone to commit the murder for them. And in the middle of this was a drug enforcement agency officer who was undercover, and by luck, they interdicted it. How does that compare, the information we learned from what's in the U.S. compared to what is sort of being alleged here in Canada? What's your sense?
Well, I don't think we have a lot yet. I mean,
Yeah.
the police have been very circumspect in terms of what they've said. I mean, the information that was unsealed in the United States goes into a considerable amount of detail, not the least of which was the good luck about the DEA agent and who talked to whom and whatnot. We haven't heard a great deal about what, if any, efforts were made to protect Mr. Nijjar. Whether the police was monitoring him or anybody else, whether there were any undercover agents or anything of this nature. So I think it's too early to really compare the two. I think the real crunch is going to come when the Crown takes this before court. And then a lot of this that's not now public will have to be made public.
So, Ward, you said you weren't surprised by this. I was certainly surprised when I was sitting in the House of Commons that day and the Prime Minister rose and made the allegation. But when you lay it all out, 3 men arrested, links to the government of India being investigated. It looks to the public like a hit squad that was hired by the government of India based on these allegations to commit this murder, and maybe connected to other killings that have happened in the country. I mean, I know you're not surprised because of your background in this, but how do you think Canadians should view this and react to it, given sort of the way we've seen Canada-India relations go over the last number of years, to see this sort of spelled out like the way it has today?
I think Dick said it. This is unacceptable for a country to carry out murders in another country. The Indians, do I think the Indians were part of it? Yeah, I have thought that from the beginning. You don't send the Prime Minister out to say something like that unless you have pretty good intelligence. And I don't think that they ever had the intelligence that of the murder plot itself. They had intelligence which was a precursor to the murder plot, which allowed them to warn Nijjar. But I don't think they had enough intelligence to know when or how it might, who might carry it out. Where this goes from here, $64 million question, but I assume they will have enough evidence to at least convict these individuals of murder. Whether they can go any further is another matter altogether.
Dick?
But having said that, and I agree with what Ward has said, India is there. India ain't going away.
No.
And our Indo-Pacific strategy had a very important place for India. So we're going to have to do like any number of countries have done in the last century when we have problems of this nature. We're going to have to keep hammering away at this to the greatest extent possible, while still saying there will be some advantages to technological cooperation or trade or finance. Not easy to do, but India is not going to go away. We have a huge Indian diaspora, and we're going to have to be able to do both at the same time.
And in some sense, one of the things you haven't mentioned so far is the fact that there are rumors that the Indians have gone back to the Americans and said, well, we've done an investigation, and this was rogue elements in the intelligence services. So there is which is frankly what I thought the Indians would always come down to, and what they may ultimately come down to with us at some point. But it's probably going to take longer for us and them to have a conversation about these issues to get to that point.
Just as a final point, because I do want to get to the Justice Ogg report, but is it believable that rogue agents or rogue elements in the Indian government would assassinate people allegedly in the United States and in Canada without some sort of high-level sanction? Is that a believable thing?
It's possibly believable. It's not something I believe because I think, frankly, and I assume I'm making a bit of an assumption here, but given the nature of the way the information came out first,
right.
Clearly this is pretty clearly this is probably signals intelligence, so it's pretty high-level Indian intelligence. It's not rogue elements. It's pretty clear this is the Indian government.
Dick, Dick, do you see it that way?
No, I do. Also, the Indian government writ large, including the intelligence communities, tend to be fairly bureaucratic. Yes. They're fairly hierarchical.
Yeah.
People do not go off on tangents in the Indian public service and succeed. I think it's highly, highly unlikely.
Okay, we appreciate that, and we'll probably discuss it more as we get more information. But I do want to turn now to the Justice Marie-Josée Ogg's initial report on foreign interference that came out today. It looks at concerns about foreign meddling, mostly by China, in the 2019 and 2021 federal elections. And it finds there was some foreign interference, but it finds that it did not undermine the integrity of the electoral system, and it did not impact which party came into power in 2019 and 2021. However, the report finds that it's possible that foreign interference impacted results in a small number of ridings, and that it did undermine overall public confidence in Canadian democracy. As well, the impacts are more present within some diaspora communities. Overall, though, Justice Ogg says Canada's electoral system is robust.
The acts of interference that occurred are a stain on our electoral process and impacted the process leading up to the actual vote.
Very confident that the intelligence information that's important for me or for others in the intelligence apparatus of the government is shared appropriately.
This report is a damning set of conclusions and findings in the first phase of this inquiry about what the Trudeau government has indicated over the last 18 months and contradicts much of what the government has told us over that period of time.
The next phase of this inquiry will assess the federal government's capacity to detect, deter, and counter foreign interference, and will make recommendations on that, and that's due by the end of the year. So, Ward, I'll start with you. I mean, you saw the range of political opinion there, certainly a big difference between Michael Chong and Dominic LeBlanc, but the high-level conclusion from Justice Ogg, not that different from what we saw from David Johnston. Is there anything specific that stands out to you today?
Not particularly. I think, as you said, there isn't a whole lot of difference. There was enough that the Conservatives can spin one way and the government can make claims the other. But there really isn't anything dramatically different from what David Johnston did. And in fairness to David Johnston, he had much less time to do it and much less support in doing it. So hardly surprising that she has not come to some refinement of his views. But her views are pretty much the same. She has made, there's some differences in emphasis, and she's moved further on some things like the nomination meetings and so on. But there isn't a whole lot of difference really between what David Johnston said originally and what she said. So what she's saying. So ultimately, what you have is a whole lot of stuff, I guess mostly in the Globe and Mail, which turns out not to be true, which has spun the whole issue considerably further than the actual information appears to support, which isn't to say that foreign interference is not a problem and and that it will continue to be a problem, but it's not. It's really an overstatement to say that this is a damning report, frankly.
Dick, how do you see it?
I think, broadly speaking, I share what Ward has said. I think two things. She's used different language and has gone a little bit further on the issue of, the likely impact on a small number of constituencies. Uses slightly stronger words, touches it a bit more than David Johnston did. And as Ward has pointed out, she emphasizes a little bit more the nominations process, which I think is a big component of this. And hopefully she'll have some specific bits of advice. I thought the way that she wrote the report, you can tell she's a Justice of Appeal. I mean, it's all laying out a lot of boilerplate, the facts, the this, the that, the other thing. One of the things that I found disappointing is somewhere in her introductory remarks, she says she has not tried to reconcile conflicting statements given before her. So, for example, when the Prime Minister says, he never received intelligence and David Vigneault said he gave him a lot, it would have been nice if, with all of the information that she has access, if she would have at least tried to sort out, some of these issues where there's a clear contradiction. Would it have been possible to do it perfectly? Probably not. But there were quite a few of these contradictions throughout the hearings, and she sort of just not dealt with them at all.
Do you think that she might get to some of that in phase 2? Because I know that she says she's going to look at information flows and different things. Do you think we might get a reconciliation or a clarification on some of those things based on where it's going?
Well, I don't see how she can come to conclusions on some of the issues without doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, if the Prime Minister and the Director of CSIS fundamentally disagree on whether intelligence is being, kicked upstairs appropriately, how can she conclude on whether or not there's a problem with the communications of intelligence within the public service with the government? So at some point, I think she's going to have to make some effort to try and sort out exactly what happened. And I don't mean this by saying, you Prime Minister lied or you Vigneault lied, but simply figure out who was at what meeting, when, what pieces of paper were there, who alleges what was said. So I think she's going to have to do a little bit of this. At least I hope she does.
So, Ward, how do you view that particular aspect? Because there is sort of a high-level conclusion I take away from this, that there are communication challenges between the intelligence briefers and the political receivers, that they may be talking past each other, may not understand how each other's world works, and may not quite understand the urgency and significance of scraps of information in these conversations. But what do you take from Dick's point that a lot of the who knew what and when and did they respond appropriately isn't quite reconciled?
I think Dick's right that it's not reconciled. I'm less sure than Dick that she's ever going to be able to reconcile those things, because the reality is I'm not sure they're reconcilable, because they're entirely people's recollections of a disparate group of meetings over a wide period of time. In which one side is trying to communicate information, the other side is trying to learn information. They both have an imperfect understanding of the other's world,
right? And
so they're not really. This isn't kind of two people who understand all of the issues talking to each other about an issue. It's two completely different groups of people who understand different things trying to communicate a complicated issue over short periods of time with short bursts of provision of information. It's tough, and I'm not surprised that there are things that are unreconciled, right, and likely will continue to be unreconciled. She may be able to reconcile some of them, but I'm not sure that I'm not as sure as Dick that she'll be able to do that.
So Justice Ogg, though, has come to the same conclusion that David Johnston came to, who came to the same conclusion that the committees appointed to oversee the 2021 and 2019 elections came to, that while there may have been attempts by foreign powers to influence the elections broadly, the high-level integrity of the elections held. So we're down to a couple of ridings. Richmond, Stevenson East, Don Valley North, where there are issues with the nomination and issues with misinformation on WeChat, which obviously need to be reconciled. But just to start with you, the high-level sort of allegation here politically has been China was meddling to help the Liberals get elected, and the Liberals knew about it and did nothing because it benefited them. Is that borne out by what we've seen?
I don't think so. I think all of the conclusions and the facts of the three areas that you've just mentioned don't draw me to that conclusion. Yes, there was foreign interference. I think by and large it was unsuccessful, except possibly in a few areas. I think the Liberals were going to get elected no matter what. And to sort of argue that, I actually disagree a little bit with the Commissioner about her use of the stain on democracy. I mean, even an unsuccessful attempt at interference is an attack on our sovereignty. So don't get me wrong, I think it's bad, but I don't think it was of a nature that we should, don sackcloth and ashes in terms of how our electoral system is going. I don't think what she says, what Johnson said, and what others have said lead us to the conclusion you outlined. I don't think the stream of fact and the stream of logic is there.
Where are you on that? Because Justice Ogg wrote, the evidence I have heard today does not demonstrate bad faith on anyone's part. So people may not have responded the way people think they should have, but she says there is no wrongdoing or bad faith with what she has seen to this point.
I think that's encouraging in terms of where the system is and how people have tried to manage the system to deal with things like foreign interference. Remember that the committee that was set up within the government to try and deal with those issues was kind of first in 2019, second in 2021.
Right.
Cut at the issue and attempt to deal with those issues. They're complicated issues. I mean, I think one of your people at one point said in response, commenting on what Justice Hogg had said, Madam Justice Hogg had said, that how would you like the government on, for example, the WeChat information coming out to say this is misinformation from the Chinese? Who do you believe? Is that the role of the government to tell people that things on WeChat or other organizations are misleading or attacks from foreign? This is complicated stuff, and there's a long way to go before you know what the right way, before we're going to have some picture of what might be a way forward to deal with these issues on the basis of her recommendations.
Right. So Richard Fadden, just a final point on that, about the WeChat and the government's reluctance to weigh in there. And they've been criticized for that, not the government, the committee's reluctance to weigh in on that there. They have still not conclusively proven this was foreign interference. It's likely some of it was driven by the Chinese Communist Party and the government. But if you don't know for sure misinformation is foreign misinformation, and you have to respond to every bit of misinformation and disinformation, that is a very difficult threshold to manage as a government.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it is, and I think what it should lead us to is to re-examination of the definitions and of the thresholds that these committees have to deal with.
Right.
I don't think you need certainty to the same level of a criminal trial before you act on information, but you have to have a reasonable level of certainty. Mm-hmm. And also, I think the question arises of, if this committee, to whom are they speaking? What are they telling them? I mean, just because you conclude that there may well have been foreign interference, foreign state-derived interference, that doesn't mean you have to call you up and broadcast this across the nation. You can have discreet conversations with trusted people who should be made aware of what potentially is happening. So I think there's a range of possible outcomes for this committee, and I think it would be very helpful if Justice Hogue sort of looked at this range and also at the threshold that would enable it to act or not act.
Ward, just to give you the last word on that point on the threshold, because it seems like the conclusions are the integrity of the elections held, but some more work needs to be done to make sure future elections also hold.
I think she's making a fair point. She makes a fair point on that issue that if we want to ensure our elections are fair and safe in the future, we need to make sure that they're protected because foreign interference could get worse, and it's not likely to get any better anytime soon. So if it could potentially be worse, we need to be prepared for it. So she makes a fair point, and I have no trouble with that, and it will be interesting to see what kind of recommendations she comes down the pike with.
Okay, gentlemen, I always appreciate the insight and the time, so thanks for coming in. Ward Elcock, Richard Fadden, thanks so much.